What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 422. My name is Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and as always, I'm joined by
Ron.
I wonder who the buzzards will like best, you or me. I hope you make sure we're properly dead before you start, old Rip Beak. And me, John.
Yeah, it's John. Good to see you both. I like your background, John. I like your looks so like such a cute, positive thing with two dogs. It's so sweet. Just cover up the arm and the gun. It's good. Nothing bad could happen.
No, don't accidentally kill anybody.
Yeah. Welcome to this week's episode. We're going to get into our required viewing pick in a moment here. But as a little preview of the show, we're going to get into the finale of season 2 of House of the Dragon a little bit. And also 2 out of 3 of us have seen M. Night Shyamalan's new film Trap that we'll talk a little bit about. Maybe some, not to spoil anything too much. Ronald hasn't seen it. Spoiler there. He's the third that didn't see it.
Ooh.
I feel trapped that I didn't see it.
I don't want to ruin anything for you.
We're here to set you free.
Yeah. But we'll get to that towards the back end of the show. But John, take us right into your required viewing. Tell us about that image behind you and why you picked this one again.
Why, those are my friends Snitter and Ralph. The 2 dog heroes, anti-heroes of Martin Rosen's 1982 film, I believe. I want to make sure I've got the right year here. Yeah, 1982 animated film. Called The Plague Dogs. Now, The Plague Dogs is based on a book from 1977 by Richard Adams, also called The Plague Dogs. And the kind of cool working relationship there is that this is not a sequel in any way to Watership Down, but it is a sort of spiritual follow-up because Watership Down is a Richard Adams book that was made into a film by Martin Rosen as well. And they both have this kind of tone of sort of, before we started recording, Ronald, you said this is not a kid's movie. And I think Watership Down was always the movie that like had little rabbits on the poster that you would see as a kid. Right. Oh, it's on HBO, and you'd get your parents to let you watch it. And then you would sort of become an adult by watching that film because the rabbits are, fighting and killing each other. And there's mean rabbits that will tear other rabbits' throats out, and dogs and cats and predators are horrifying to the rabbits. So it's like getting into the world of an animal's head the way that an animated film can do, but doing it with as little anthropomorphization as possible, so that you're sort of like, what would rabbits really think like? And I think The Plague Dogs is a similar thing of like, it depicts dogs that are sort of trying to behave. The animators are trying to depict behavior, and the writing is trying to depict behavior that seems like what a dog might actually do. And I even noticed that like the word choices of the characters reflect their understanding of the world, and it's a dog understanding of the world. So the idea of a master is a really important thing, and it's really sad that these dogs are like sort of in love with people and needing people at the same time as people turning their backs on them. And the reason people are turning their backs on Snitter and Ralph in this movie is because they are believed to possibly be contaminated with the plague, because they've escaped from a scientific research facility where they don't seem to have anything to do with the plague research or experiments that might be happening in that facility, but nobody knows that. And there's a kind of air of medical research on animals is something that nobody really wants done in their backyard, and nobody really understands it. And so there's a little air of sort of, this movie is commenting on the inhumanity of man towards animals for sure. But even in a more specific way, it's about the point of view of these animals that sort of don't know where they fit in a world where they seem to fit in is as someone's pet, or the way a normal dog would, but they are seen as like murderers and villains. And it's really interesting to see this kind of story moved over to dogs, because they really are sort of misunderstood, on the run from the law. And you get to a point in this film where there's no way it can be true to itself and have a happy ending. You know what I mean? And I think, again, you see that kind of movie made with people all the time. You don't really see animated films with animal protagonists that are talking to each other that also have that sort of bleakness. So I guess, I mean, there's a lot to say about this film, but I want to maybe go ahead and throw it to you guys. Ronald, you started it off before we started recording. This is not a kid's movie.
It's not a kid's movie.
Is it even a movie for grown-ups? I feel like this movie could be very upsetting to almost anyone because, as we know, even today, there's people who can watch all kinds of violence committed against humans on screen, but when you see animals suffering, there's a weird little thing that kicks in.
Which I don't understand.
Like, almost bizarrely unflinching about depicting the sadness of these animals.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, animals are innocent, but humans also. Lots of them are very innocent. So I have equal, I just living.
Oh, sure. No. I guess that's almost a side topic. Yeah. People who don't like, I don't think, I'm saying, I think there's still something, I think innocence is maybe you're getting at the heart of it. When you see, an innocent mistreated or a baby or a child, somebody who can't understand or doesn't have control over their situation. Right.
Yeah.
But I think animals are a definite trigger for people.
Yeah,
people will say,
100%.
Does anything bad happen to the dog in this movie? If so, I'm not going to watch it,
Right. Yeah.
And therefore they should stay a million miles away from Martin Rosen's The Plague Dog.
Yeah. I mean, it starts like the first 10 minutes, there's a dead dog. There's like a dead dog that clearly has been abused in some way.
Right.
And is thrown into a chute to be burned up. So like, that just it. I think what's really cool about it is that, voices. I miss not recognizing voices. And sure, like if I were a Brit coming up, drinking a spot of tea, watching this, I feel like I'd recognize some of the voices, but voice acting was so different back then. The approach was different. It was like you were just trying to be the character. It wasn't like you were trying to be. There's this thing that celebrities do now where they are a celebrity doing an impression of a dog now, rather than a celebrity trying to be a dog in that role.
Right. Like I'm going to be a human, and I'm going to take on a dog's like mindset.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and make dog noises. It's interesting you mentioned the voice acting in this, Ronald, because the most recognizable voice would have to be John Hurt, who is Snitter, the dog with the bandage on his head. He also did a voice for Watership Down. But what we're talking about here is a distinguished British thespian who's coming into this role, and again, there's a very naturalistic style to like the way the voices are recorded. I don't know how it was recorded, but it sounds like they got the actors like in the same space interacting with each other. You're right that it's like lines are kind of tossed off in a way that doesn't feel like the usual voiceover for animation, where it's recorded the way we're recording this, totally locked in. The person's basically with a microphone and they're directing everything towards the mic. This almost feels like the audio. Remember how in Fantastic Mr. Fox, the dialogue was supposedly recorded like in rooms with the actors interacting with each other, and you do get a sense of it. I don't know if that's how this was done, but I think it might be down to what you're saying, the kind of like the trained nature of a British actor in this era would have been to really go in and try to embody the character. And it's different from getting, say, Jack Black or Zach Galifianakis to come in and do like, whoa, they would do. And I think it lends. It's part of what I was saying about the animation style not being made too cute.
Yeah.
I think the voices have a similar air of this doesn't feel like a kid's movie in terms of the kind of voices you're hearing either.
Yeah. So. The reactions sound like that, like they're in a room talking. Like something will happen and they'll say like, a boulder's dropping. Oh no! And they'll just live in that. I almost got crushed by that rock. You are a fool for being near the rock. And I'm like, oh, it's a lot of dialogue happening about this thing. I think it's really cool. So I don't know. I think I liked it. I just was not expecting it to be as sad as it was. It was just so. I just wasn't in a great mood, and I fired it up. I'm like, this is making me sad.
I want to hear what Steve was about to say, but Ronald, are you a mood person? When you have a mood, do you lean into a mood, or do you try to break the mood?
I try to break the mood.
So you put on a comedy when you're feeling sad rather than a depressing movie. I feel like I'm somewhere in between. I sometimes need to listen to. I remember one time I was listening to this Elvis Costello album, The Juliet Letters, which is like a string quartet and his voice. And it's all these really pretty songs, but they're all kind of sad songs. And my girlfriend at the time was like, how can you listen to this? Like, this is so sad. And I was like, well, it makes me happy because it's pretty. It's so beautiful that I can not be depressed by it. But if I was really down, I don't know that I would reach for music like that necessarily, because sometimes I don't want to amplify the mood that I'm experiencing. What about you, Steve? Of the movie and just that idea, do you find yourself leaning into the mood, or do you find yourself trying to counterbalance it with something?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like I feel like, sometimes when you are sad and you listen to some sad stuff, it's like sometimes it's perspective that like I don't really have it that bad.
Yeah.
Like depending what the tone of the song or the subject of a song is. But I definitely have found myself in situations where like I'll wake up from a nightmare sometimes and I'll put on like a Disney movie. Like I just need the opposite of what I just felt, and this is like as an adult, like last week, I'm not talking about when I'm a kid. Like I'm just, it's a counterbalance for that. But yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like the movie, when I went back to make sure I had the title right, like because I was second guessing myself, and John, when he talked about it, he was basically saying like like dark and bleak. I think it was in his description last week, and going into it, I don't think I'd ever even heard of this film, to be honest with you, and I think it's actually a really great movie. It's like a really really well animated voice. Like I think it's great. Like in terms of just like saying how I feel about it, watching a film, but it's really really dark and bleak. Like it's kind of crazy that it's really just the fact that it's animated is not a feature really. It's just it is just a movie that's animated and is very dark and bleak. Like it's not built around anything. I feel like the expectation of a lot of moviegoers is something animated is going to be positive and happy, and like don't go in with that expectation for a film. Like even Watership Down, like John said, you come out of that being grown up or something. Like
well, no, I mean, but you're right that it's still got the structure of an adventure story.
Exactly,
where heroes are fighting villains, and at the
exactly.
end, there's sort of a good triumphing over evil moment at the end of the movie, even though like the toll is there. No, you're right that this is not that. This is much more in the model of like a what is it? I kept thinking of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. That basically ends with the two characters like being gunned down. It ends before they die, kind of like this, but it ends with the idea that death is imminent. Is like there's no way out of it except for that. You can't really hope for better for these characters.
And there's just so many elements in it that it doesn't even lean towards like bright or positive. Like even the score, even some of the cuts to scenes like are kind of scary. Like not even like scary as in blood and just negative. It's like it's kind of horrific. Like when they walk in, like that there's in the opening, like when they pair up and they walk through the testing facility, it's like so quiet, and then it cuts to that shot of like all the hands like in the middle of the coming out towards the center of the aisle.
Yeah.
Like that's like that feels like it would be like a scene in like an indie horror film. Yeah. Like in today, right now. And even the music and the score like kind of really really plays into that. And even like when they're like helping Todd like get food, but by the way, Todd the Fox, come on. Not that Todd, though. Not the Todd from Fox and the Hound. Come on, guys. Like even when they're kind of getting that stuff, like it's so quiet and serene, and you're like, oh, this is kind of like a cool shot of ducks on the water, and it's like, and then it gets really scary music comes in as they're capturing a duck for Todd, and I'm just like, damn, this is like every element of it is really almost, I don't know so much intentionally, but it's like committed. At least I think is the good word, is like it's committed to being this kind of film that is just it's just animated. Like it's what it's like. I felt really weird after it because like. I really was thinking the whole time, like, wow, like, especially the way it ends, I thought was incredible. Yeah. And I was just like, but man, this is a really great movie, but it's kind of weird that people probably went into this movie with no clue what they were about to watch. Yeah. Like, a cinema score would be maybe an F on expectations for a film like this.
Well, Martin Rosen said there was an early screening, and I couldn't glean if this was like for distributors or something, but it was just an early screening, to get hype going or whatever. And someone came up to him at the end, and he was talking to like the distributor or the theater owner or something. Right. And they said, was either one of you involved in the movie? And the other guy he was talking to said, he kind of stepped away and pointed to him and said, he's the one who made this movie. And the woman hit him with her purse. And she was like, how dare you do this, but she was like, how dare you treat those dogs that way, kind of was the way she was reacting. And so I really think that it's kind of to your point, it really is like unrelenting. I think the way people would say today is this movie goes hard.
Yeah.
So and hard. I think that is we all admire anything that is committed. I don't know. We've seen so many movies that were like, this is a hard watch, or this is lighter than air, or whatever. But when something's committed to its concept, it gets this weird kind of appreciation. And so the bleakness of this movie, I find myself getting closer to, even having seen it before, I was watching it this time going, oh, it really is just kind of marching towards this doom. I saw where the book actually has a place where the ending of the movie kind of happens, and then there's a little thing that's supposedly like a conversation between the reader and the writer that the writer puts in. That's like in verse form, where the reader says like, it can't really end this way. And the writer's like, no, that's the story that I'm telling. And the reader's like, but no, we want to see them earn something for what they've been through. And then he's like, but this is the way life goes, or whatever. And then there's like an epilogue that starts off with these two real life people, a naturalist named Peter Scott and another guy who studies animals at the time, who was famous in England, who actually I think wrote the book that Watership Down pulled a lot of its rabbit information from. This guy, Ronald Lockley. It starts with a scene of them out in a boat. They're like on a tour to try to help these groups that are trying to conserve some territory on the coast for some animals that are like, there's some rats that are overrunning some birds' habitat, and they're out there researching it. And they're in their boat, and they see the dogs swimming in the water, and they bring them into the boat and save them.
Wow.
But it's like, that's a chapter that occurs after he's basically like, no, this is the ending. And it's almost like, here's a chapter to make you feel good if you need this, you know?
Wow.
And I think the way the movie does that, the only hint the movie gives to that is in the ending credits. I don't know if you noticed, the island does fade into view, but it's like after you've sort of gleaned, there's no island. They're just swimming to nothing. And that thing of Snitter saying, I think I see it. Don't you see it? You know? But like, I think the movie, I found a quote where Martin Rosen said, he didn't include the happy ending from the book because these dogs were doomed from day one, and their demise was the thing that we were leading to. And how that was realized was what I was really going after. So he was much more interested, Steve, in exactly what you're talking about. Just can I sustain this tone, this doomed tone with dogs? And will people tolerate it? And turns out they didn't really. This movie did not do well financially at all. Watership Down earned its budget back and then some, and this movie earned back, I don't know, a third of its budget or less than half or something. So I think it's revered now as the kind of thing we're saying. Like, you just don't see animated movies like this. But you can see how people would have been... like if they thought they were seeing even a rough adventure story about dogs, they probably got to the end of this and were like, thanks, you just ruined my date night, you know?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
But Todd was a cool character. And I think even the way Todd is designed is not as like appealing looking as that fox would be in another movie. Like, he has a kind of evil kind of look, even though he's not, but you're almost seeing him. I don't know. There's so many parts of this that I feel like you're seeing a dog's understanding of things and the relationship between dogs and foxes. Like, I like that idea that they'd be able to run together, but not really completely, you know, there'd be a kind of togetherness there. But that might be one of the most anthropomorphized things that happens in the movie, is you get these little moments of conversations, even them talking to the sheepdogs. Like, just the idea that there's all these different ways of being a dog and being in the world, and these two dogs have just the hardest luck story of any dog, you know. But you do see that thing of like, when the animal, it's like Toy Story, when the animals are alone together, they kind of talk. But otherwise, when you see an animal, you totally see them acting and sounding like an animal. Did you guys notice Patrick Stewart as the voice of like the major? You know how you have the human voices? Like, the book actually has a lot of stuff with the humans, but the movie really uses like interstitial scenes of like panning over the countryside, and you hear conversations between different people that kind of sell the human side of the story, which is all about the researchers realizing these dogs are gone and the people in the town and all of that as it builds. In the book, you get much more of those people's story. But one of the characters is a major in the military, and that character in the movie was voiced by Patrick Stewart. And I just noticed that, like, he kind of comes in at the end. He's like the one saying to shoot or not to shoot at the animals at the end. But yeah, I mean, it's like a bunch of stage actors. Another interesting factoid about this is that Brad Bird was one of the animators.
Oh wow, that's cool.
And supposedly was fired from this movie, but Martin Rosen doesn't seem to remember Brad Bird working on the movie. Like, he remembers him by name, but not like, at the time, it didn't make much of an impression. So he said he fired him, but he doesn't remember firing Brad Bird.
That's wild.
But he saw the Iron Giant years later and like sent him a note to say great job, but he said he didn't expect a letter back because Brad Bird probably remembered being fired more than he remembered firing someone.
Firing him, yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think this movie kind of held up for me in a lot of ways. I was wondering, like, where do you put that whole thing of like movies that are super bleak? Do you have like a favorite movie, Ronald, that does have like a super depressing ending that you can kind of watch and take pleasure in, despite how grim it is, just because it's well done?
I don't know about take pleasure, but Hereditary is one of those ones that just it hits me like a ton of bricks. Aaron refuses to watch it again. But I could watch it again. I've watched it a couple times, and it's bleak as shit, and it just keeps getting more and more bleak. And I don't know, something about it. I think because it's just like it's so weird. It's so weird, and so like it just escalates and escalates and escalates. Yeah, that's the one that I can think of off the top of my head.
What about you, Steve? Do you have
The first one that ever like always comes to mind anytime I hear a bleak movie is got to be The Mist.
Oh,
Because I love that movie, like period, full stop. And it's like one of those movie going experiences I remember. Like just you could just hear the audience just completely turn on a movie that they were really into. Because it really did commit to that part of the story, and it's brutal how that movie ends. It's absolutely horrible.
yes.
But
Almost
I love
like
it.
needlessly so. Like it's almost like this one where you go like, oh man, you went for it. Like you didn't have to make it this bleak. My least favorite part of the ending of The Mist is I found what's her name from Walking Dead.
Walking Dead.
I found her annoying in The Mist, and so the idea that she kind of wins out is like really annoys me. That she's like in the end like you should have helped us, or whatever. I just feel like that. I'm like, because I don't know. I feel like when someone's asking you, can't you help a woman home? Whatever she says is just so like, no, we're holed up here because there's monsters outside. This isn't just a question of like being chivalrous anymore. But no, I guess I can't think of that many movies that I put in that category ahead of this movie. Like this one's always been in my head of one of those that kind of, you were talking about the quality of it, Steve, of like, I don't watch it that often, even though every time I've seen it, I have been pretty much like, wow, this really is like solid. Yeah. And that committed quality is what gives it its pace and its tone and that doomed quality. It is what makes it a movie, kind of, is the fact that it's committed to that idea that makes it sort of hard to watch. What, Ron?
I got one, but it's not the whole movie. It's a particular scene in a kid's movie so Aaron had never seen the Never-Ending Story.
Okay.
So when that horse dies, she'd never seen that happen in a
text.
Yeah. She'd never seen that in a movie before. So adult her's reacting to how she would have reacted as a kid. I'm like, this is it. She's like, is the horse coming? I'm like, it's gone. Like it it doesn't come back.
Yeah.
And I remember the feeling, because I read funny enough, I saw the movie, I read the book, and then I rewatched the movie after I read the book. And the feeling that I had watching that scene, just it's coming. It's just like this bleakness. The horse is acting strange. It's like, what's going on? Why are you not as confident as you are to just keep traveling? It was heavy. It kept building, and then when it started to happen, I was like, no, this is not. I cry every time.
See, I find it hard to care as much, and I get why people are moved by it, especially if you saw it as a kid.
Yeah.
I never really watched that movie much as a kid, so it never really clicked with me. But when I watched it recently, didn't we watch it for this?
Yeah, I was gonna say it was one of my required viewing picks.
And I remember thinking like, oh, this is that scene. I can see why people are sad, but for me, the movie doesn't give you enough time with him with the horse like being friends for me to not feel like, well, this is just crazy. Like I feel like we meet the horse and 5 minutes later the horse is dead. So it is a little bit weird for me in that sense. But as far as the bleakness of what you just said, Ronald, how's the horse going to get out? Oh no, that's it. he's gone. Like when you're a kid, you really do have that thought of like that last chapter in The Plague Dogs. Like, can't we just have someone reach in and pull him out of the water? Like, can't someone just save him instead of this? So I do think there's something about scenes that can make you feel that way. That is like, movies do that, right? I mean, that's a huge part of, as Nicole Kidman says, what does she say? Crying feels good in a place like this.
Yeah.
Heartache
Heartache feels good in a place like this.
That sounds like a
that's
list
about.
episode of the pod where we I feel like that's a interesting theme, in terms of like kids films.
Yeah.
Oh
There
yeah,
you could pick any kid slash family film, especially like really 80s, 90s. Like there's so many of them, even like through the joke about Disney, like how everybody's parent dies at some point in these movies. It's like
Yes.
there's
yeah,
so many little seeds and a lot of animated kids and family films that are like it's kind of priming, for what feelings feel like sometimes that you may not have felt before.
yeah,
And that's like that is really like the magic of movies. It really not to be like cheesy, but I mean to see that in a film like, Neverending Story, or I think of like Land Before Time, or like, tons of stuff growing up that had those moments that really kind of show you the spectrum of emotion that you could probably experience watching a kids film or a family film. It's really interesting, and it's a pretty valuable experience, I think. And I never shy away from like the idea of like I'm gonna let my kid watch this because it's okay to feel
yeah,
that,
Yeah.
like it's important to feel that and to know what that is, especially when it's like you're relating to a character, and the good ones really do it, and it stays with you, kind of like Ronald's describing.
I remember when I was a kid, they let me watch Old Yeller,
Oh,
Right.
like,
wow.
and that's like the prototype for this in a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So again, we might have to figure out a way to frame that because I think that sounds fun. We did do an episode called All the Feels at one point that was
Yeah.
just movies that hit us in the feels, but we didn't specify like my childhood primer on heavy adult feelings. Like there's got to be a way. Maybe we could come up with a catchy phrase for that. But I'd like to do that. Well, I did have a couple other little quick notes about the movie that I thought would be worth mentioning before we move on. One is that the name of the research facility is Animal Research Scientific and Experimental, which is ARSE, ARSE, which is British slang for ass. So that's a little in joke. Despite the tone of this film, there's time for British wordplay. And then one of the other things that I thought was interesting was just this kind of idea of the way the two dogs. I love the way that at different points, like early in the story, Snitter is the one, because he had a master before and had a life outside the facility. He has a little bit more information than Ralph, and so he's kind of getting Ralph to kind of move along. And then later, Ralph, who has been, as far as we know, in this facility his whole life, doing these awful endurance tests where they make him swim until he drowns, and then they basically, right on the edge of death, they bring him back. And they say this awful, creepy thing about it that I actually, I just thought was it's a line that's in the movie. That there will be a point where the additional endurance induced by the dog's expectation of removal is counterbalanced by the limits of his physical capacity. That's like the way the scientists are talking about it, but it's like saying, oh yeah, there'll come a time where his belief that he's going to be saved, which gives him a little pop of energy, will eventually, we'll see what the end of that is. And he will actually, presumably he'll be dead at that point, and we will have learned whatever we've learned.
Oh my goodness.
But like then later, Ralph, though, once he gets a little bit of freedom, he's kind of the one who, like, he helps Snitter out when Snitter, who we discover has had this brain surgery that is causing him to confuse what's subjective and what's objective. So his visions are becoming real to him. His memories are becoming real to him. He kind of goes off into these little fugue states where he has to be motivated. Then Ralph is the one who's motivating Snitter. Again, like human characters would be, but it's just interesting to see that they kind of hand back and forth, like who's kind of pushing the other one along. I found that incredibly moving watching this, like the way they kind of love each other by the end of the story, the way they've become like real, like brothers that are forged by this bad experience. That I found that to be really moving. And I guess I can end on this one note. There's just something in the book that I thought was a good distillation of what the movie seems to want to be saying about the way that, the way that people treat animals. Let's see if I can find this quote. Here it is. This is from the discussion in that chapter that's added at the end where the two naturalists are in a boat talking about, and in fact, they actually talk about Richard Adams's books in the book, saying that he's too sentimental about animals and that animals are actually not, these creatures that he depicts in his movies. But then one of the naturalists says, it's time people started thinking of man as one of a member of species inhabiting the planet. And if he's indeed the cleverest, that merely gives him more responsibility for seeing that the rest can lead proper natural lives under minimum control.
Damn.
I just thought that was a good button.
Yes. It's a great way of looking at it.
Like if we're so smart, then why can't we figure out
Right.
like how to make it work for everybody, you know? So
Totally.
but there's
Oof.
also, I will say in the book, a subplot where a guy's daughter is dying of a sickness, and she says, "Dad, will there be a cure?" And he explains to her, "Yes." And she says, "Well, how will they find the cure?" And he explains to her, they make animals ill, and then they try to bring them back, and then when they know that works, they can test it on people. You know, so there is a little bit of a thread about like what's happening with medical research, why we do it. But that whole excuse of like that we have dominion over the animals and therefore we can just do whatever we want with them. That's pretty
Right.
thin soup when you look at it from a moral standpoint, you know. And it's that kind of thing of like when you were talking about the imagery inside the horrific imagery inside the research facility. Seeing that stuff feels like, why are you showing me that? And then you're like, oh yeah, that's happening in some way, somewhere. Like each thing that's depicted is in some ways based on a real experiment. Even though he said that it's not likely that you had one facility that would be experimenting on such a wide range of animals. We see monkeys, we see rats, we see rabbits, we see dogs. But the idea that each one of those awful things, like putting a monkey in a cylinder where it's got no social input to see what happens to a social animal that gets no social input, you know, those are horrific things. You have to be smart to think of that experiment, but couldn't you be just as smart about being compassionate? So, yeah. Fun film. Glad I could bring the conversation to a complete sad standstill.
Right.
But I guess there's no pick for next time because next time we're coming back in for a huge round of Watch 'Em All. This is the biggie. This
Close
is the episode that is, well, we're going to do one more after that.
Oh,
this
that's
is,
right.
This is the monster because in this one
right.
the next episode we're tackling 4 Halloween films. We're doing Halloween H2O, Halloween Resurrection, Rob Zombie's Halloween, and Rob Zombie's, is it just called Halloween 2 or is it called H2?
I think it's Halloween 2.
Okay. So the Rob Zombie Halloween movies and the last 2 attempts to wrap up the series we've been watching up to this point. But Ronald, you're in for, have you seen any of these films? H2O?
I saw the one where Busta Rhymes does a like bicycle kick.
Resurrection.
Okay.
So you've seen what many of us regard as the true low point in the whole Halloween series. But I do think it's fun to see the way they keep trying with this series. But I think Resurrection is the first one that feels to me like they weren't trying to make it a prestige movie. Like all these others, they're trying something. But Resurrection feels like this could have been a direct-to-video movie, you know.
With celebrities, though. It was a great...
no, it's got some stunt casting in it. But I'm just saying that the tone of it, it's not really going for, like, cinema glory or anything. But so that'll be next week. We'll be back into the watch 'em all territory, so you can put yourself through the 4 films that we just mentioned, so you can take part in next week's conversation.
Let's go to House of the Dragon.
Yeah, let's do it. Now, Ronald, I want you to kick this off because you said this should have been called House of the Dragon.
Yeah, man.
So tell us why.
You don't have to show the entire whatever because I don't want to spoil anything. The entire what the climax was supposed to be, or what it hinted at. Just give me like 30 seconds of it. You don't have to give me the whole thing. Because we get into all this preparation. Who's loyal to who? Who's doing what? And that honestly is one of the more compelling things about this show. Like the acting, we like to talk about how adventure, these shows are pretty action-packed, but the acting is really what ropes me in. I mean, it's why Game of Thrones was so good. It's why House of the Dragon is so good. The dynamic between the characters, and it's like I want that more than I want the action sometimes. I'm like, oh, these people haven't interacted in a while. Oh God, there's this new pieces of information that could affect the dynamic of their relationship. Oh, they're gonna meet up. Oh, wow. I didn't think this was gonna come out of it. It's really interesting. So I'm a big fan. I just wish the finale showed just a teeny bit of what's being hinted at.
What about you, Steve?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I agree in general. I mean, I thought the finale was great. Like I thought the episode, as an episode of the show, I thought it was a great episode of the show.
So good.
It kind of felt like, in a weird way, it almost felt like last week's episode felt more like a more appropriate finale if it was going to be like that, if that was the attempt. And again, this is like coming in with expectations of what we've been fed with these kinds of scope shows for a while. Like, it's this massive thing, but I should have known, because usually that happens in the penultimate episode, and the last one really just sets up the next season, which this one basically does. Like, we didn't see any kind of battle or fight that we thought we would see. It's really just to set it up for the next one, which is fine by me.
But 2 years. Don't you think that's
I know
part of the reason why?
That's why
that's what hurts,
so
man. I was gonna say, like, that's what hurts, is that, like, you cut the count of the episodes down, and now we have to wait another 2 years, and we'll have a different prequel show released between now and then in the Game of Thrones world to kind of, like, I guess, tide you over a little bit, or get you into something new that they hope. But yeah, I mean, there was so much excitement coming out of 1 into 2. And again, like, overall, I thought the season was great. Like, I don't really have a ton of complaints about the season. And honestly, even the finale was, again, I thought the episode was really good. I do feel like I thought I'd see a little more action throughout the season, with the exception of the episode 6, I think it was, or was it episode 5?
With the dragon battle.
Yeah, with Aegon, and
I think that was episode 4. Wasn't
maybe
that
4? I don't even remember.
I'm trying to remember, but you're right. It was like a little earlier. And I think what you're saying, Steve, is something that hints at something. Like, you kind of said this. If this had been a 10-episode season,
yes, exactly,
then the penultimate episode having more going on than the 10th episode. Like, if it was episode 9 was the huge one, and 10 was somehow, you'd feel more satisfied. I mean, I don't feel dissatisfied, but I guess because I was ready all along. I know this is an 8-episode season. I've read the book that this material comes from, so I have in my mind, like, wondering, like, where are they going to end this? Because this isn't like a series of books. This is a long book that's like a history book about Westeros. And so of a 700-page book, this show is taking like a 200-page section from the middle and making a show out of it. And so it's different. There's no clear. It used to be that, like, Game of Thrones was like, oh, first season was the first book, second season was the second book, seasons 3 and 4 were the third book broken too. But it's a long book, and there's a division point of doing it. So I feel like this is lacking that. And so for me, as a person that kind of knows the story, it was increasingly apparent to me that they didn't have enough time to do the groundwork they needed to get to where, like, there's 2 or 3 huge things coming up that I knew, like, how are they going to have a battle in the last episode? Because it's just not there yet. There's a couple of motivating factors. There's a couple more awful things that happen that push characters you love to doing awful things that really make things ratchet up. So this season almost got you there, and it didn't quite. But I think if it had been, even if it had ended the same way, I think if it had been 10 episodes getting to that point, people might feel more satisfied, just because you wouldn't have maybe so many things crammed into the last episode. Like, I loved the stuff down with the pirates and Tywin Lannister and all that, the mud wrestling. That was really fun, but it felt weird to have it in a finale episode where everyone's waiting, like, are we gonna see a battle? You know what I mean? It felt like maybe that could have been dropped into earlier episodes or something. But I'm kind of with you, Steve. I thought it was actually a really great episode of the show that just surprised me a little bit when when you do the thing, you check the time and you're like, oh, there's not much time left.
Right,
I was like, there's no time to do a big thing. Then I started going, oh, okay. They're probably going to end this in a kind of Empire Strikes Back feeling of, oh man, shit's on, but it's not resolved. But then I thought about Empire Strikes Back, and I thought, well, Empire Strikes Back still has Luke and Darth Vader fighting right before that. So maybe this show needed something like that to make people feel like the season went somewhere. But for me, the payoff, there was 2 or 3 scenes that gave me a great payoff for the season. And again, knowing just how much they have to do and not how they'll do it. Like, anyone who thinks book readers are smug, this show makes that impossible to be, because they've done enough things that are different from the book that I don't know where it's going to go, but I know roughly where it's going to go. And I do know, like, if they'd had another couple of episodes, they probably would have gotten to 1 or 2 or 3 of these huge events that really will have people going, holy shit. So I think the biggest problem is the short episode order and the 2-year wait. It's nothing really that's a knock on the material we were given. It's just those other things. Man. But the payoff moment of what happens between Daemon and Rhaenyra in this episode, for me, was like one of the best moments in the show. Like, it was so satisfying. Like, I didn't like those characters being kept apart for a whole season. I didn't really like Damon being like tripping all season and just having visions, even though some of that stuff was really great. But where he gets at the end of that, like the realization he has about what his brother chose, when he comes to understand more what his brother knew, because now he's seen some of what his brother's seen, there's this thing of like, oh, now he's bought in a way that feels really meaningful, that you realize in the first season when he was supporting Rhaenyra. It's like, well, maybe he was kind of doing it and kind of not, but now it feels like Damon is all in. I think that's worth taking a season to get to.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think sending a magnetic character like Matt Smith off to wander around a scary castle for a whole season feels a little... Again, it feels strange when there's only 8 episodes and 6 of them are him basically, with new characters. But no, I think I love the show. I think what they do that's so great is the way they really dig into the dragon stuff. And I always see where the budget goes on this show. Like, I never question when they come up to one of those, like that 7th episode, that scene with the people sort of auditioning to be dragon riders.
That was rough.
That's basically the budget and the orchestration. That's a battle scene in terms of what the show is trying to do. Yeah. But you didn't know at the end of that scene, like you said, Steve, you didn't quite know that this was the big moment at the end of the season, just because it feels weird. It's an 8-episode season. It's harder to get that same rhythm in. Somehow 10 gives you so much more space and so much more as an audience time to, like, a couple more weeks to be in the show and come back again and again. You would feel a little more ready to say goodbye to it, especially knowing how long the wait is going to be. But I loved all the dragon stuff. I love the way that the dragon choosing a person is more important than a person choosing a dragon, and that once a dragon chooses you, you're kind of their little pet human that they love, and they won't put up with anybody else's shit but you. I just think that's such a neat thing, and I think the show has done a good job of differentiating the dragons. Like, at this point, I have different feelings about different people's dragons. I think that's an interesting angle. Do you have a favorite dragon, Ronald, or a favorite dragon rider?
Is it Sea Smoke?
Oh, yeah.
Sea Smoke's probably my favorite. I mean, there's like so many memes that have kind of gone around about like it being very similar to like movies you've seen where like the what was a little more aggressive than you would expect. I'm loving Sea Smoke. That's my hero right now. What about you guys?
Do you have a favorite dragon, Steve?
I don't know. I don't know that I've attached to a dragon yet in this series. I mean, they're all just pretty cool.
Do you feel sorry for them when they get hurt like I do?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the way that Rhaenys's dragon went down is kind of sad.
Oh man.
Melis.
Yeah,
and
like
backwards.
Like, she gives her that look. That little look she gives her right before she goes. It's almost like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't do it,
No, they're all just incredible. I love all the dragon stuff. Is really that's the good stuff right there. Like, anytime you see it close, like that, I feel like the one episode that opened like with the wide shot of her on the beach with the 2 dragons beside her, like I have that as a wallpaper on my computer. Like, that is a landscape shot. Like, that is amazing stuff. Like, that's the cold chill stuff that I love this show for. Beyond the character and the plotting and everything. It's just like they do dragon stuff better than really anything. I mean, it's just a blast to see that stuff.
Well, I mean, that's got that sea smoke element in it too, where it's like they have that little conversation. That's like, and it's such a brilliant thing. I love the way the show dealt. That's a huge part of the book that I was hoping they would spend time on, and they did. But this notion of expanding the ranks of who can ride a dragon, and Rhaenyra opens up. She gains so much power, but she also is bringing in these people who she may not be able to trust. I think that is really interesting. But I don't know. I would guess that if I was going to pick a favorite dragon, I can't help but enjoy it every time Vhagar flies up, because Vhagar is basically like the size of a fucking castle or something. He's just huge. The fact that he's so old and he's so big because he's so old, or she, pardon me, Vhagar is a she. She is so old. I think that's cool, but as far as like the dragons that we see in action and then we get a little bit of character, the dragon that Ulf befriends or that picks him, that dragon is written about in the book as being one of the more docile dragons. And I like the way the show reflected that dragon seemed more like curious And then like when he's submissive to it, it instantly kind of warms up to him. Like
Yeah.
it's a different way of relating to that dragon. So I'm beginning to like that dragon whose name I believe is Silverwing, because I like that idea of, you don't always know when you're a dragon that you're just like a dog that has a shitty owner. Have you ever felt sorry for a dog because they have a crappy owner?
Right.
Ulf might be kind of a piece of shit. We don't know, but he's got a dragon that is maybe the sweetest of the wild dragons, riderless dragons in the story. And I just think that notion that everybody sort of knows who these dragons are and who's ridden them in the past and where they are, but there's this thought that only Targaryens can do it. And now this story opens up this idea that, we really don't know the rules of, we believe these people have Targaryen blood, but we really don't know the rules of it. And I love how no one in the story really knows, like they can kind of control these dragons. It's such a great metaphor for so many things, like going into war with a weapon that can't be beat. But once you employ that weapon, you've changed the war, like that's something that is so real and we can all relate to in our world. But in the way the fantasy characters deal with it, these dragons, it's like, it's fun to see a funny character hop on the back of a dragon and take it for a spin to show off to his buddies back in King's Landing or whatever. But to realize the power that drunk piece of shit now has in this world is crazy, and I think it's going to be interesting to see the way the show deals with not just the people we've seen, the Targaryens that are fighting, but the people who are brought into this fight who might not really be particularly loyal to one side or the other. No, it's just really good. If we're going to talk about it as fantasy storytelling, this show really, for me, has the goods. It when it goes there, it's so grounded that you really do feel like you're seeing something you haven't quite seen before. Even if the idea of people hopping on dragons or dragons flying around, it sounds like something you've seen a million times before, but I don't think you've ever seen it. Like even Kristen Cole, seeing that character get shook by what happens when dragons come into a battle. I feel like that's a huge emotional point for this show. It always makes you realize it's cool to talk about using your dragon in a battle, but when you actually see what happens, it's horrifying,
Yeah. Whole villages. It's rough.
And I think they've made sure to point out that when a dragon sweeps over the battlefield and like strafes and he's not just burning people on the other side. There's, everybody who's in the vicinity gets turned to ash. So, well, human characters. Is there a favorite human character on House of the Dragon, Ronald? Do you have one you like to watch more than the others?
Oh, man. I don't know. You come back to me. Let me think about it.
See?
I don't know. Damon's so interesting. Still, even though he's kind of like off doing his thing this season. I would say him. I think also just his performance is always really kind of fun.
No, you feel like he is the character. Like there's something about Matt Smith in that wig doing that voice
comes through.
And when there's a scene in this, I forget which episode, where he's like sitting on his dragon, kind of looking down at somebody. Yeah. Where it was just like, again, it feels like a million like book cover paintings from fantasy books or something, and you're just seeing such a cool version of it, like him in his like, black armor or whatever. Well, I'll just say I love Rhaenyra. I know that she's got that Targ crazy in her, but I kind of like that. And I think Emma Darcy, the actor that plays Rhaenyra, I don't know, the way they are in scenes, like it's one of those performances that elevates, like whoever the scene partner is. I think Emma Darcy does something really kind of interesting with them. But that moment at the end of episode 7, where she's standing on the shoreline with her sort of dragons arrayed behind her, and she's still sort of sooty from the scene before, it's like, I don't know, at that moment I realized how much like I am Team Black. Like I'm so, even though they no one's pure in this fight. But I bend the knee to Rhaenyra if I had to. But I also think that like it's really fun, the scenes with Larys and burnt up Aegon. I think those scenes are pretty good. Like I like the pairing of those two characters, the way that Larys is, taking the fact that everyone's always called him the Clubfoot, and he's got this weird kind of sympathy for what Aegon has gone through with his, now completely impaired physically due to being burned up. But there's also like he's manipulating him even at the same time that he's like sort of building him back up. I think that's just really interesting. That's the kind of, you were talking about the quiet conversations on this show, Ron.
Yeah.
I think those Larys Aegon scenes are a great example of like great stuff that is just right around the edges of this huge story.
Why would a king If he heard this, why would he think this is a real thing? Goat fuckers? I'm like, sir, like, you're gonna let me go through this path and we're gonna live with the goat fuckers? He's like, goat fuckers. I feel like you're confused about the way that this whole thing
Well, I mean,
works.
there probably is a lot of like bad information about what people in other parts of this world are doing.
He's
But
so
also,
out of touch.
that was kind of like saying rednecks, I think, to him,
Yeah,
because
but
he's like a child of privilege from this super important family. So to him, yeah, the commoners out in the farmers and stuff.
he also looks like a melty ice cream cone, so he should shut the hell up.
I heard a couple funny nicknames for him. Aegon Chargarian was one that I thought was pretty funny. He likes the actor supposedly likes Aegon toast. But I thought that character, talk about one that I don't like, but like I enjoyed the hell out of him this season. I thought in the first couple episodes he was so interesting when he was like an idiot trying to be a good king because he thinks that's what he's supposed to do, and then he gets his child is murdered, and then he goes into like a rage, and then he's basically told, don't do anything, no one needs you to do anything, and then he won't accept that, and then after that he's recovering from this awful turn of events. So it's like I felt like they gave us really good, in the early episodes of the season, a lot of material with him that made his plight at the end. Like, you feel for him, even though you think he's a piece of shit. Yeah. Apparently that's my phrase of the day for Game of Thrones characters or House of the Dragon characters. Because there are a lot of pieces of shit in Westeros.
So many.
But, like, even though he's bad, he's sort of humanized by the fact that you remember he didn't really want this job. And he actually, when he is given the chance, he does try to do, like, he's kind of like one of those dumb politicians that wants people to like him, but doesn't know anything about what's happening. You know? And you see how dangerous a guy like that could be, but you also see there's a way that he could have been, like, if he was being manipulated by good people, he could actually be a quote unquote good king. But based on the events of this season, there's no way in hell. Like, there's no way that guy would ever be anything but an insane king at this point. So, but I thought that actor was really good. And his scenes with Laris, like I said, were just really the icing on the cake for that storyline.
All right. I think I know who my favorite character is. And I think it's just because she lives in truth more than any other character. Also, rest in peace to her charred body. But Rhaenys.
Yes,
man, like I do love how accepting she was of everything. Like, even the craziness that her husband had going on, she's like looking Lord, what's his name? Lord Corlys, the
deadbeat dad.
Corlys. Yeah, it's the super deadbeat dad. I don't know why they made a black man a deadbeat dad in this story, but I was like, man, this is crazy. But
well, your options in this world, Ronald, are deadbeat dad, incestuous murderer. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that in a way he gets off light, but I do think it's funny that, like, not funny, but it's interesting that, like, they give this a person of color a much higher profile in this show than Game of Thrones ever had, and yet, like,
baby daddy.
And then I will say though that Corlys, this isn't the. I think people should know that he does stick around long enough to do some interesting things.
Okay.
But I agree. At this point, it's sort of like you want to like this guy, but he keeps missing these opportunities to acknowledge these sons. But he's willing to use them, and I think that's what makes him seem so bad. It's not just that he's not part of their lives, but that he's so willing to throw them into the fray, or at least seemingly put them to task. So.
Yeah, and Rhaenys just she looked at these guys and was like, right. Why are you not telling me what this is? She's like, I'm good. I understand. I just love that energy. She's such a good partner.
She was great with everybody, right?
Yeah, she's great with
She brought that kind of what you're talking about, that kind of calm sense of understanding what's happening.
Yeah.
And except for that time she bust up through the floor and killed thousands of people.
Except for that one time. I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, she was not calm in that part at all. And then Olivia Cook's character, Allison, who I just have a super duper crush on her since Sound of Metal. Is that she was she was in that. Yeah. So good at that. And but yeah, I say Rhaenys is definitely my top pick. I think it's the older I get, the more you just want somebody that's nice to be around, good to joke with, and just loyal, and easy on the eyes. You know, just.
Don't you think that they at least included that great scene? It was like a post-coital scene between Corliss and Rhaenys, where you get the idea that he's totally okay with her kind of taking charge, and they sort of imply in the bedroom as well. I thought that really gave a lot to their coupling, because in the first season it felt like they were kind of in and out of like really being with each other. But that really made me feel like, oh, when she goes, he's really going to lose something. And it's going to put him in this frame of mind. And I think, again, like I said, Corliss is kind of halfway on this journey that he might be on. But I think that, like, the way they played that, I was like, oh, if I didn't know she's the one who's about to get burned to a crisp, I would think he's the one who's about to die. Because the way they were talking was more about her saying, you can't just get back out on the sea and all this stuff, you know, whatever. I thought that was actually pretty cleverly done, that they spent a couple episodes building up. Oh, these two people have this rapport, and they're in a world that's kind of maybe pulling them apart a little bit. Yeah. For her to be the one that went, I thought was actually a real, not a surprise, but like it was an interesting twist. If you felt like, oh, the obvious thing that seems like it's about to happen is that Corliss is going to go. But I also think it's very hard for this show to surprise you with a character death when it's dragon fights, because you sort of know who's on dragons and you know who's going to fight with who. And so there's, in the back of your mind, you're like, one of these three characters, if not all three, are going to die. You know, like it's hard to surprise you once you know who's on a dragon and you know who's flying at another person with a dragon. It's like, well, one of those people's probably going to die.
Yeah, this is no way that both of them are going to. Also, last thing, Aegon's cock bursting like a Brockwork? Bro, what? Why would you tell us that, sir?
I think because in the book there's a mention that after this he could never perform sexually, but he liked to watch his favorites do it from like a hidden place in the room. So I think the fact that line is in the book is why they felt comfortable setting up the idea that because you know we saw him earlier. Remember, he was jerking it in the like the window of the castle in season 1. So we're supposed to believe he's a guy who was quite the coxman, and so to him that's a huge. I mean, as it would be to anyone, I guess.
Yeah,
a huge blow. No pun intended. But no, I think that the he says burst into flames like a sausage on a spit. So does he mean it burst, or does he mean it burst into flames? It's a mental image I don't really want to spend too much time on. Poor guy, though. Poor entitled piece of shit. Incestuous, murdering piece of shit.
You think a dog ate that?
You know, I hope that dog got something.
Yeah.
That sweet little dog.
A sweet little dog.
That rat catcher's dog.
Oh, my God.
No, he's my favorite character. I take back anything I said. The rat catcher's dog is my favorite character. I was so glad. I feel like Game of Thrones would have shown that dog getting killed. Yeah. I feel like this show has a softer sensibility. We just see him wandering off. But Game of Thrones would have made sure we knew that like someone was eating him. You know?
Oh, boy.
So yeah, we'll see you in 2 years.
So, I was gonna say that'll be it for 2 years. Yeah, yay. All right, let's just briefly, John. You and I saw Trap. Not to get too deep into it. I think we're kind of on the same page. I mean, based off our text back and forth.
Should I get off? Is there?
No, I'm not going to say anything spoilery.
No spoilers. No spoilers. Nothing that you don't know from the trailer, Ronald.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just some feelings. I mean, my biggest thing is like I found the movie entertaining enough in general, and I you know we've talked about it a few times. I think, really since Oppenheimer came out last year. But like I'm a huge Josh Hartnett fan. Like I really do like him. I've always liked him. When he's popped up in little things here and there, Penny Dreadful, I always liked, and he was on Black Mirror recently. Obviously Oppenheimer. So like for him to have a starring role in a movie like this for after so much time, it's kind of cool. And I thought he was really good in the movie. But overall, I just felt the same way I felt about a lot of the more recent Shyamalan films. Some I've liked more than others. This is kind of probably middle of the road for me, maybe a little lower on the ranking of his films. But the biggest problem is always like just the dialogue is so weird at times. It's like genuinely like these people they've never been in like a real conversation, like talking the way people talk. And beyond the words being weird, it's like even some of the reading of the line, the takes that are chosen. You know, I don't even know the proper movie making terminology, but like the line reads are just so weird sometimes. Like it takes me out of the movie. And I think as a it's a I don't know, it's like it's a con for sure for me, but like it's in all of his movies in some way, shape, or form, or for the most part.
Yeah.
I'd say earlier in his career, it was always him in his movie that had that weird line that was not good, and he was kind of not good with. Uh, but like in the last few that he's made, like old, even Knock at the Cabin, which I actually like that one probably the most of his more recent ones. There's still they pop up all over the movie, and it just is so weird to me. And it takes me out of the movie. And I think overall for me, this is again like kind of like a middle of the ranking of his films. Great heart performance, especially I feel like in the third act where he kind of opens up and kind of gets a little more fun in the performance. But yeah, I don't know. That's my big problem with it, I guess. But overall, it was just okay.
Yeah, I don't have much to say that's different from that. I guess for me, I think the third act, like maybe it's Josh Hartnett is having fun, but it's while the movie is kind of falling apart around him, in my opinion. And I feel like there's a difference between being unpredictable and having like no discernible structure, kind of. And I'm not saying this movie has no discernible structure. I'm just saying that there's a whole. It reminded me a lot actually of Red Eye, is that the closed scenario of this, and then the movie actually goes on beyond the scenario that you're expecting, and it's just the time spent in that. If you can keep the momentum going, great. I felt like this movie felt like it led up to like 2 or 3 different endings and then kind of kept going. And sometimes that's cool. And sometimes that makes you feel like, okay. And you realize you're being kind of exhausted by a movie. And I think that by the time this movie ended, I was ready for it to be over rather than feeling like, it left me in suspense or anything. But I also think there's, the dopiness of Shyamalan. We've talked about it. We're generally on the side of this recent era of him doing this sort of more like not trying to, like, for a while there his career was taking a predictable level of like, oh, now he's doing big effects movies and the movies are getting larger in this way and that, and now he seems to be doing more, if not more personal films, but more kind of manageable movies, maybe mid-budget. I don't really know what the budgets for his movies look like, but like they seem to do well enough that he keeps getting to make more, but he's still staying in this sort of elevated B movie space that he's really kind of always been in, but really for the last 4 or 5, like ever since Split, I feel like there's been this kind of new, spunkier, scrappier version of M. Night. And I agree with you. I would put this one towards the lower end of those movies. It is funny and silly, and I think in some ways the opening part, there's a lot of like good tension just with Josh Hartnett's character kind of realizing the situation he's in and kind of testing the limits of how he can get out of it. But what you said about people acting kind of weird, I think maybe the dialogue forces them to act a little weird because they don't know how to do it except to kind of be dorky about it. And this movie gets a little bit of extra juice because it is about a dorky dad trying to sort of impress his daughter. I don't know. There's just something interesting about all that almost works and almost keeps me going. But I have to say, when the movie had me going the most was actually earlier when I was thinking about when Henry was little, how I would be into whatever he was into, or I would try to be into whatever he was into. Or if I knew he was into something, I would try to make it happen for him, And I sort of, I don't know, that really, I feel like he captured the kind of dorkiness of being the parent in that situation. It's like, I'm going to do the thing that you think is incredibly awesome with you, even though I'm the parent standing on the outside of it rather than the person really in it, like the kid would be in that situation. It reminds me of taking Henry to movies and the fair and stuff like that. I just really got in my feelings about, like, now that I have a 16-year-old, how we don't really have that kind of thing anymore. I mean, there's still things we share, but it's not that thing where I get to like, oh, I get to take him to do the thing he thinks is really fun. Now it's like if he has something he wants to do that's really fun, he probably wants to do it with his friends, and I'm supposed to drop them off and pick them up after I get a text later. So that really had me. I think that M. Night captures that. I think as a parent, you can feel a lot of parental love and like fatherly love that goes into this movie, and I can sort of believe that that's a hook that he had. I don't know that the movie by the time it's over really works 100%, because by the time you get to the end, you've even kind of left the father-daughter relationship a little bit in a way that feels to me like it moves away from what works best about the movie, which is the fact that while he's doing all this other stuff, he's also trying to keep his kid happy. He's trying to protect her. So in the general terms, it's like, oh, any parent can relate to, You're trying to create a bubble around your kid and keep them happy and keep them separate from your bullshit. Well, what if your bullshit came crashing in on an occasion like this where you're trying to make your kid happy? Well, what if your bullshit were that you're a murderer? You know, it's like there's a lot to that, but any parent can relate to the first part, which is just you really don't want your kid to ever have to deal with you at your worst or your past or the worst things you've done, or to even see you in that light. So I think the movie does have something to it, but I think in general, that weird, dopey M. Night dialogue, the kind of herky-jerky structure and pacing, yeah, it somehow wore me out by the time it was over, rather than had me, like, I didn't like leave with a lot of energy. I left completely sapped and just like, oh, okay, I guess that's it.
The other weird thing, and again, Ron, this is no real spoiler, Ronald, like, but it's also, I guess the real twist of the movie is that, like, I didn't realize that, like, the movie is basically a promo reel for his daughter. M. Night's
music?
daughter plays the pop singer in the movie.
Oh.
And like I'm not exaggerating, there's no less than like 6 to 7 like performances in the movie where like almost the entire song is performed. Like at least half of a song is performed during this concert that they're at.
And then she's in the movie a lot more than you would think that.
Right. And then, you know, as the movie goes along, that character, the pop star, becomes kind of like, you know, more involved in the movie than you would think, just based off of, you know, the fact that they're at a concert. But I mean, that was another thing I was like, wow, I guess, yeah, I was like, they're spending a lot of time on this song. Like there's like a chorus, like you get to the verse, chorus, verse, you know, it's like, wow, that's 3 minutes of a song. But yeah, Aaron and I both left like, okay, that was his daughter. He obviously loves his kid, but like, wow, that was a.
And that's not the director one. This is the other one.
Yeah, this is the other daughter.
Okay,
yeah, not the one who made the other horror film that came out earlier this year.
I saw somebody saying they appreciate M. Night being like a proud dad in that way.
Yes.
And then someone commented, I guess it's not nepotism if you like the person. And I honestly think that's kind of where we are in our culture, is that when we do like the person, we do go, oh, it's cool that they gave their kid a leg up.
Right.
But when we don't like the person, we go, nepotism. And I guess I don't really have feelings about it one way or the other. It does feel like kind of a funny, like you said, Steve, it's like the secret twist in this film is that it's actually a seller, like a commercial for his daughter's music. You even have Kid Cudi showing up in a wig, you know, and I don't know if maybe he's collaborating
as a Targaryen.
Yeah, when you see the movie, you'll know. Ronald.
You never knew that. That's the real twist. That Kid Cudi's like.
That would be crazy.
You didn't get the finale on House
3,
of the Dragons. You got the finale in Trap. There's a Targaryen.
He's even wearing black, you know. But no, I just think, and again, you remember did you see Old, Ronald?
Yes.
You remember the rapper in that? What was he called? Mid-sized Sedan?
Yeah.
Kind of that level of like pop cultural commentary. This movie kind of has the same sort of like relationship with pop culture, except for the fact that, as Steve said, I was thinking, wow, these songs are really credible. It felt like a real artist's songs, you know, not something written just to be in a movie. And now I understand if it actually is somebody's musical output and not just, oh, my daughter wrote this music for this movie, but she's actually trying to do a thing. That makes a lot more sense because the movie really does kind of both background and foreground her almost through the runtime of the movie.
Totally.
You know, very, very, very high visibility in that way. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like he's going to get to make another one most likely. I
hope he does. I mean, like,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I hope he does. And and like, I like how he's doing these. Like, he's doing these movies that are 30 million or less. He's in some way self-producing them a little bit, like in terms of, you know, budgets and keeping it lower than a lot of other movies out there. I mean, it's weird though, because like Old, you know, Knock at the Cabin, even this, like they're not really performing that well. Like they don't perform. Maybe on VOD, like when they go home, you know, maybe there's better back end for that kind of stuff. But I mean, I guess that's the benefit of keeping these budgets low, and you know, he gets to make the movie he wants, and you know, it finds an audience, and just make the next one. But I'll see whatever he puts out. I'm a fan.
Same.
It's just like the weakness of his that I've always felt is like getting worse or more prominent or standing out more to me than any other exciting thing in the movie does, and that's not good. But
well, no, it's like a tone that wrecks like if the suspense and the filmmaking is so key and the pacing is so key, having like clunky dialogue and people that you don't quite buy in that world, it breaks it. It's like the appeal of this world, like that Spielberg-y way of moving a camera around a room or whatever. If you look at Spielberg's movies, one of the things that you'll notice is most of them have amazingly naturalistic acting in them, or really good acting, or really warm acting or something. And therefore you can be kind of showy or interesting with the camera when it's being held down in that way. But I feel like with M. Night, there's almost like it's a tonal thing that doesn't really work with the suspense and the kind of world building of the thing. I will say this movie gets by a little bit on the fact that the dialogue that sounds like no one would actually say this, it sounds a little bit better coming out of the mouth of a dorky dad who's trying to appeal to a teen or a tween. Like, there's something about the stilted, awkward nature of their interactions that does feel like this could be a parent-child interaction. But even for that, it feels awkward. Like, even as someone who's been a middle-aged person interacting with a 13-year-old, it's still not as awkward as the way M. Night writes it. So there is something that almost seems like. In the past, I've thought this is almost a feature, not a bug, of his movies. It's like he writes weird dialogue, And I think when it's working, like Knock at the Cabin, where it's a really stilted movie. Characters are doing really strange things, but the movie gives you a background for why they would do them.
That makes sense, yeah.
I feel like that movie makes a little bit more sense with the kind of stilted dialogue and the weird interactions, whereas something like this movie might feel a lot better if it was just like full of like really fun, crackling dialogue. Like, for instance, the guy who works at the stadium, Steve, like that scene could be like really funny instead of just kind of like goofy funny. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's something about that character that's a great example of what we're talking about. With better dialogue, we would be loving that guy. But with the way the movie's written, you're sort of like, oh, that poor actor has to say some amazingly dorky things or just act in a way that no one acts. But I still think you get a couple of those M. Night camera moves or shots or just something about revealing a scene that work. Late in the movie, there's a shot that a car pulls away and then we move over to a bicycle wheel that I thought was just a good example of that thing that M. Night still does really well, which is just make little details like Hitchcock would do this, like zoom in on the object in the room that indicates kind of what's happening, or show us not just the people but the scene. So he still has that touch, and I still think he's like got a certain kind of magic when it comes to just laying out a scene and creating tension. But yeah, it's what he does. He writes them and he directs them. So if we want to see him direct them, we're gonna have to accept his writing them. It's
like when somebody's like with Tyler Perry, he's like, I wrote, produced, and directed this, and you're like, okay. All right. I mean, that's incredible. But you also like hand carried a man out of a casket in this scene. Like it's like, why did this family get so mad that they pulled their
Guess what? I did the poster too. It's like, well, the poster does look kind of shitty. I edited the trailer. The trailer seems kind of amateurishly done. It's like eventually you're going to find that skill you don't have. Ronald, you make music. You could write, record, release all from your desktop.
Sure.
You probably still would bring in an artist to do the cover, right? I know I do when I'm putting out music.
Hell yeah, especially if it's
you could make a cover, but you probably wouldn't. You know what I mean? Like, there's a point where you say, I'm better off having someone else's aesthetic elevate this work rather than just doing it because I could.
100%. 100%.
You make music too, Steve, but I don't know that you release it from your computer the way that we do. Otherwise, I would have brought you into that example.
No, you're good. All right. Well, yes, Traps in theaters. Did you guys see anything else that you want to mention before we wrap it up the episode?
Not that I can think of. Yeah.
I have one quickly. I want to just say, John, I don't know that you actually talked about it on the podcast, but I know we talked about it over text, but I went and saw Longlegs.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's because maybe you kind of brought me down a little bit or what, but I loved it. I
was talking
really
more about
it.
The hype being like, this is the scariest movie. People are leaving the theater shaking and stuff. I was saying that hype is going to make people go in expecting something the movie's not quite doing. Yeah. But no, as far as what the movie has going for it, it's got a lot going for it.
Yeah. No, that was I finally got to check it out, and I was really happy that I could see it in theaters too. But yeah, that was the only other one I wanted to mention, and I would say that one's doing amazing business. So if you have any interest in that, I don't know, it'll probably be in theaters for a few more weeks, but it's definitely one of those things like go out and support a movie like that because it's kind of overperforming, and you like original horror and you just want to see more of it and things like that. So check it out. Movieshmovie.com is the website. YouTube.com/Movie Schmovie Podcast is the YouTube channel if you want to do the visual option of the podcast. And again, next week when we come back, it'll be a special episode, the third part of our Watch 'Em All series for the Halloween franchise. Like John said, it'll be H2O, Halloween Resurrection, and then Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2 they'll be talking about. And then that'll be a fun episode. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We will see you or hear you. You'll hear us. We'll talk to you. You'll hopefully see us on YouTube. All maybe of the above. I don't know. Next week. But thank you so much for listening. And as always, you made our day. Thanks.
Bye.